See how we do today. Yesterday was a great one. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Give everyone a minute to filter in here. Hey, Jeff. Question asked and answered. That's funny. All right. All right. I will give Jeff Beam a chance to answer or to join the call before he answers his question. So Chris's system profiler is cool. Apparently it was not profiling by default. How can a non-administrator access the profiler? Adding pages to an alternative folder gets most of it. That's a good question. I would ideally you'd have admin access, but of course that's going to be restricted by the powers that be. I don't know that I've had anyone ask how to get access to it.
Yeah, I think so definitely I am not an administrator in production, and that's probably a permanent situation. And the people who are administrators in production won't understand the profiler. So this is where I started. So I've done this before. I've actually taken pages from the system folder, put them, apply them to a different folder, and then and then use a group that I'm in, grant that permission to that folder. And, it's sort of like, okay, I can at least get this little utility out of system that way.
Right.
Now, what I'm finding is that an important piece of this profiler, though, is like, in this case, it's the gutter pieces to start, for example. And in some of these other pages that you see along the top there, it moves from the gutter to the top. But as I started finding those pages and putting them and binding them to a different folder, I'm not getting, in this case, the gutter or the header and some of these other ones. So I found myself scratching my head. Well, okay, while I can maybe get
what
access
is the gutter? What are you referring to as a gutter?
You see at the bottom where it says load session, start new profile, that string of stuff. And what that seems to move to the top on some of those other pages. So I was hoping one of those other pages would get me access, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, I see. That's actually unfortunate that it moves around. That's a folder action bar. Now, the profiler folder is a folder behavior, so it has these actions by virtue of its folder behavior.
So Is that something that can be applied to a different folder, or is that basically unique to this one folder and can't be duplicated?
Yeah. Well, could we? This is a specific folder behavior. Like it's got. If we look at the query editor and find our profiler, it's got a specific behavior. So if I look at entity folder, and I look at folder behavior type, yeah, profile or folder behavior. Like there, I don't know that I can do this on the call. Well, let's just see if it works. Shoot, I shouldn't have done that. Let's see if we can't trick the system into creating another one. I'm just gonna, let's see here. We'll create a folder, call it faux profiler. Okay, and then I will run that same query I had just run. This isn't going to work, but let's try it. What I want to try to do is copy the folder behavior string, and then I will find where entity name is like faux, and then I will copy its ID.
Well, of course, one of the early problems would be you might have to actually restart SHM for it to.
Oh, for sure. That's almost certainly, that is definitely going to be a requirement here. Oh, that's not what I want. I want this one. But I mean, worst case scenario is during a maintenance window, you could get this done. I mean, it's really not meant to be used by non-admin in the current incarnation, right?
Sure. I mean,
let's see if we can't trick it though. And I'm just curious if I can get this to work. Probably shouldn't do this and or show you how to think about this way, but we are where we are. So let's see. Chris, why we're waiting for this to restart? How about how much time do you spend in the designers these days for the work that you're doing? Are you like a full-time decisions dev at this point, or?
you ask a hard question. I mean, I'm thinking I'm spending on the order of 20 to 30 hours a week. At this point, though, I mean, I do spend significant time in there, but I am basically transitioning to being a lead in some sense. And what I mean by a lead is that I will be advising and supervising other people who do the design work, do the actual programming work, basically. Oh my gosh, you got away with it.
That's stupid. There you go. Maybe that'll work. So looks like that's a profiler there for you. So don't try this at home, but that might be a way to do it.
I may or may not have copied that down. So, but yeah, that's kind of what's happening. So I do find that I am kind of getting into doing more of what I'll call system level troubleshooting as a sort of what's going on. It's, for example, my interest in Profiler has everything to do with users are saying it's slow, and I knew that was going to happen. I just didn't know it was going to be, I didn't know that another application group was going to say it's slow as well. So I'm trying to now I'm looking for how am I going to get some hard data to support what changes we may or may not want to make, or what stories we're going to tell. I have been sort of harboring this idea that we're in this growing pains of what some call a service-oriented architecture, and the growing pains is understanding that every time you make a call to the network, that's not insignificant time. So,
right, yeah, sure.
I'm kind of it sort of feels like where we were 20 years ago when we started to learn that, hey, paging to the disk is expensive.
Right, sure.
But then the disk systems all changed, and not so much. Well, the disk and the operating systems all did a lot of work to overcome that. And you can kind of see it happening in the network world already. I mean, there are these virtual servers, and these virtual servers can have these defined network associations and everything. But then at the VM side, you can quietly collect them into the same box, so that even though they believe they're chatting over a network, they're actually never leaving the box.
Right, yeah, makes sense. Well, sir, I think if you need to, this is probably your best bet. So you can just steal the folder behavior string off of the profiler folder in the entity folder table, and then add a folder and then write an update statement and bounce the server. That'll probably, once you have it, in fact, once you have it, I bet if you attach, you could probably, no, you won't be able to attach it to your project. Yeah, so I'd say figure out a way if you need this in prod to get a maintenance window to be able to run those queries, and that should get you what you need.
Well, I'm thinking the order of operation would be put it into my project, put the faux folder into my project, arrange the access group so that that the decisions, the developers will be able to get to that folder, and when it finally goes, and then do this hack that you may or may not have shown us, with the hope that now that it's hacked, I can actually get that to then propagate up through the usual deployment system.
Sure.
And because it will carry a security permission with it, that will then get me access to it in production.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I think that should work. Yep. Alrighty. Well, hopefully that helps. Let us know how that works out for you.
All right. Well, like I say, it might take a while for me to, it might take a few days, because I think my hunch is it's going to go reasonably well. And the real test of it will be when it gets to an environment where I am not administrator, in my opinion. I mean,
yeah, that's true. There could be some considerations there, but we should be able to test that with a designer user in a non-prod environment if need be, just to confirm. All right, so let's see, moving into Mr. Jeff Humphrey's question. Here's a fun one from the team. Is there a way to know when searching for a step in the steps toolbox if a particular item is one of the decision's core steps or an object that we have created in the project? If we search for equals, looking for string equals, we get about a dozen results, some of which have been created by our team, have created for specific purposes and poorly named, but I want to make sure to use a decision step. Okay, so let's get into the state to see what Jeff is referring to. This is about how to view steps in the toolbox. I'm going to create a flow here, and I'll name this thing equals, or just equal, and I will create a rule with the same name. And then what I'll do is create a third flow. And now I'll come into the steps toolbox and I will search for equal. So now I have equal and equal 1, and I bet equal is my subflow, and I bet equal 1 is my rule. But also I have other things in here called equal. So I think if it's specifically about rules, there's really only one rule I think that we have inadvertently introduced, and I think it's string equals. Oh, string equals yes. That one's there. Case sensitive is a regular step. So the easiest way, I think, for Jeff, I'm sure you know this, but for everyone else, maybe some are newer, is if we look at this step, which is string equals case sensitive, versus this, which is rule string equals, these names can be changed, but with the way we can tell that this is an actual component that was built either by decisions team and delivered as part of the core module or by your team, is that it shows edit rule at the top as well as this selection piece, where the string step doesn't have any rule to edit. But the question is, if I look at this rule, can I make a determination that this rule is shipped with the product? And I can't see the module name in the toolbox. I could, this isn't going to give you the answer you want. I could use the registration ID to figure out what module the rule is a part of, but that would require you to cross-reference things. I don't think we give you a way in the editor to actually make that determination. Now, arguably, we shouldn't ship any of these rules like this. Like this rule was added in a project. In fact, if we look at dependencies here, backup before collaborate. Actually, okay, that's okay. I have some customer work I'm testing things on, so that one might be okay. But I do know rule string equals is in a project that we sent out with our core module that we probably shouldn't have. Let's see. These guys are using this one. I might have gotten my local in a bad state because I have a bunch of customer work on it that I'm validating. But I don't think we actually give you any indication to know if it's something in our core module or if it's something your team has built. We don't show you the folder location, which could be helpful. We show you the registration ID so you can find it that way. But yeah, no, I don't think we give you in the toolbox. If we just think about just the access to the toolbox itself, I don't think we give you a good way to see what module or module equals project here, what project that particular registration object is related to. Unfortunately, that's a good question. That's something we should show.
Well, when you were in the toolbox there, were you hovering over it and seeing like an information? Oh,
yep.
Maybe that's something I just never noticed. Does it say anything in there?
It does. So this is for our default steps. You get this step help information. So you can go to like objects are equal, and it'll tell you the input, the output, and then we've been working through for some time, getting information for each of these. So there's a description and or links in there. So that can help. That doesn't really answer your question, but it can help you with a step you're not sure how to use.
But nothing on there.
Additional details.
Nothing on there says it's like in system designer's catalog or anything like that, right?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, like technically, if it's there's one complicating factor here, which if it's not a component, which means it's not like something that can be built, that has been built in one of the designers, it is absolutely part of system catalog, right? Like by default. So you know that if it says edit rule or has selection type, it is not in system catalog truly. Like it's not a default step. So if your question is, we should always be using, which is true, most of the rule requirements that our customers have can be met by our default rules. And I don't know where we put those at. Data rules, they're probably spread. Corey, they're probably spread all over our categories, aren't they? Like string equals, number equals in their particular categories.
They're under
they're
like
under
numbers,
everything.
data, text.
So yeah, I mean, the easiest way to make a determination is if it has edit rule or selection type, that means it is a component. That means it has been built, but you can't figure out if it's something built by the decisions team or something built by your team.
Yeah.
But you should, unless absolutely necessary, use the pre-built rules. And because like you don't want to, like string equals yes, I would never use this rule myself. I would find my actual string equals step, which if I just search string equal is going to be one of these two. And while I can't really know that, I can infer, but not, it doesn't really announce to me what it is. So this one again has edit rule and selection type. This one doesn't have any editing edits. It is value 1, value 2, and then you can actually see it gives you method information here.
Okay.
And it tells you the actual sort of method levels call that this step makes. So this is actually just like a step wrapper, some step wrapping code underneath the .NET string equals operator.
Sure.
Well, this one is actually an actual decisions rule.
Okay. The reason I was asking is because I noticed there in a couple instances there were steps where I picked string equal because I noticed that at some point someone created our own rule for string equal, but it was case insensitive. And then someone created a rule using that rule to make it another one that was case insensitive when both those steps already exist.
Right. Yeah. This is something we do see. It's really common with brand new users to the tool. Yeah. Where, in fact, we see this in our internal training where instead of using a rule that exists, almost everyone builds a rule. So they'll build a rule like this, like string equals yes, right? And that's a rule that doesn't need to be built. You can just find a normal string equals step and then use that. So always, I agree, you should always be using those rules, but we probably could make it easier how to find them. There's very few times where you need to build a rule itself in the workflow engine. Yeah. If you're routing things around, most of those rules are already in the toolbox for you.
And I agree. It comes with maturity using the tool.
Yeah.
So, all right.
If it needs 2 or more conditions is where I think that now let's start thinking about writing our a custom rule for that.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Will.
Yeah, you bet. All right, so we have anonymous attendee. So when should we use a file reference versus a document as functionality looks similar? There's a couple reasons as to when you should choose one or the other. Let's see. Do we have any documentation about this? We have file references, and that's in the form controls category. Well, I don't really like that. And it shows you how to build a form. The main, there's a couple defining characteristics between documents and file references. The primary difference is a file reference is stored on the file system and a document is stored in the database. So if you're transacting on large files or lots of files, the database tables can hold byte arrays, right? They can hold like blob data, but that's not really what they're great at. So for builds that have lots of, you expect to be heavily transacting on files, users uploading files or downloading files, all those pieces. File references make a lot of sense because what happens is and I personally use file reference entities specifically for the work that I do if I get the chance to build anything anymore, which is rare. But a file reference is stored on the file system in our file storage directory, unlike a document, which is stored in the document table. And whoever asked this question, if you're in the call and you want to raise your hand and have a conversation about this, please go ahead so we can unmute you and chat about this. But a file reference, the workflow engine has a reference to that file and it only loads it when it needs it. So the total amount of memory space required for that flow is not increased. So if there's you might be transacting like on a large Excel or CSV file or some document, the workflow engine is going to be as big as it needs to be. It runs really light, but you load a 10 gig file of file data into the workflow engine, that flow is now 10 gigabytes. Whereas if you have upload a 10 gigabyte file reference, that workflow engine's memory footprint is the additional reference string. So it's minuscule, if probably not impactful at all. So file references really are stored on the file system. There are, in current versions of the product, like 6.16, 6.17, there are also behaviors in place for us to clean them up for you automatically. That's a place of improvement that we have historically not done a good job on, is like how to clean up those files. So there's a whole new file folder structure that we save the files into, and we can move old file references that aren't needed. We can clean those up for you. Documents are saved in the database. Documents don't get cleaned up in any way. Like you'd have to build a process to delete them, as well as they are saved into the flow as like file data, and that means that there's a cost, a memory compute, if you will, cost to using them. Now, we save lots of stuff on our application as documents. So when you upload like a CSS file, an HTML template, an Excel template, those get saved as documents. So documents are really helpful. You can add them, but I would say, if it's a simple process, you don't expect a lot, use documents. But if you're building something that needs to scale well, I would use file references. And if you need to then add those to, if you need to create a folder context for those file references, I'd use a file reference entity, and you can find that step under flow management, flow management data. Yeah, add file references to folder. And what this does is it actually takes a file reference and it creates a relationship entity called a file reference entity. Now I can have a file reference in my case or in my process folder, and then I can reference those files later. So I can still make them browsable and build some rich UI around them, yet the files aren't in the database, they're on the file system. And I can save data in the database, files on the file system, and use each sort of piece to do what it's best at. So I don't know, maybe they're even gone. Hopefully that answers a question about file references versus documents. I don't know that I would ever choose documents myself. I would, even though we add things as documents. There was a customer we had a few, it was last week, a week before, I was helping someone on this call, and they're figuring out how to fetch documents and file references from a folder together, and realized we needed to put a feature request in to allow you to control if when you do a drag and drop onto the canvas, if you should add a document, or allow you to control if that saves as a file reference entity or as a document, so that you don't have to add this additional logic, or even not really understand the difference between them to build. So, all right, from Jeffrey Bream, by the way of Brian Thomas. Looking for a way to delete files from a folder that I create on the fly, like an expense report where I upload PDF files of receipts, but I want to list and possibly delete the PDF files or replace them. So, yeah, feel free. I'm not sure,
Yep.
Yeah, feel free to add some context there if you'd like. Let me go ahead and get myself set up.
Yeah, I'm a pretty new user, so this could be very elementary, but we're just kind of doing something simple like, all right, let's see if we can do a purchase order system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I create a purchase order. We use all external entities, by the way.
Okay.
Because we already have our databases and our SQL servers, and we got data laying around all over the place. But,
okay, great.
Different issue. But so I did have I have a flow which I broke, but it was working, where I created. Let me get into it here real quick. Here it is. So I put up a form. You type in some information like who's requesting it, what's the date, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then have the file upload widget.
Okay.
And then so when I hit the save button, first thing I do is I create a subfolder.
Okay.
Based on the PO number, no big deal. And I put it in a parent folder that I created to store all these subfolders in.
Okay.
And then the next step, I add a file reference, sending in the the upload control attached, and that was working. I did something, now it's not working, but it was working. And all that's fine. And I insert it into the database, and then I can, because we're using external entity, I had to write all my own flows for,
writing to, reading from, all
delete,
all the
fetch,
pipe
fetch
flows in the
ID,
configuration
save
folder. Right. Yep. Sure.
Exactly. So, I obviously I can't use the edit, so I had to write my own edit purchase order.
Okay.
So, and the same thing. So what I did then is I say, okay, so I go and I know what folder it's stored in because it matches I store the folder ID. So I say, okay, so I put up a data grid. I've tried all the different ones, but the current one is a data grid. This shows me what's, I do a get file references in this folder. I send it to folder ID and it shows me what's in the folder. That's fine.
Okay.
But now I don't have any way that I can figure out on the remove button, just remove stuff from the data grid. But I can't seem to find a way to attach a flow to that to go out and actually remove it from the folder.
Ah, right. Okay. So this is a tricky one because you're actually saying move the item. You pass a list into the data grid. It has 5 items, right? But you're going to pass a list that has 4 items out because you removed one of them.
Right.
So the tricky part is what item was in my list but is not in my list anymore.
Right. Exactly. So I thought, well, maybe I have to use a for each within a for each or something of that nature. But
yeah, you would. Now, I'd probably recommend a slightly different pattern here.
Sure.
You might be able to use like a data repeater, and you could have a Boolean on it that says remove or delete. And that way the post-processing flow is way simpler because then you'd say, give me a list of all my things coming out where delete is true. And now you just for each that list and you do your delete operation versus give me my original list, give me my minified output list and say, is each item in this list? And if not, do some work.
So you would say use a data repeater is what you're telling me.
I'm happy to mock that up for you really quick too, if you'd like to see what that looks like. So data, I'd prefer and the only reason I wouldn't use a data repeater is with lots of data. So if you're going to show hundreds or thousands of data rows, then we don't want to use this approach. And in fact, we wouldn't even really want to use a data grid. You'd probably want to show that on a report itself. But let's just go ahead and build our example out. Let's build a parent form here. And on this parent form, I'm going to put a button, and then I'm going to add a data repeater here.
Okay.
And I'm going to create a data repeater. Now, a data repeater is like a small form that can be used to show an item in a list. So you're going to get you'll get one of these rows for each item in the list you pass in.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do here, now you probably have your external entity structure already that you're going to use for this, but I'm going to create a flow structure just so I have a data object. So create data types, flow structure. And I'm going to move fast in this. Is it Joe?
Jeff.
Yeah, Joe, I'm going to move fast with this, but we're going to post this on YouTube. So if you want to refer to it later, I'll call this data repeater wrapper, right? And I'll just give this thing, I'll just call this, I'll say entity name, and then I'll call this, I'm going to have an actions, I'll call it Boolean, to delete, right? And this will be a Boolean.
Okay.
So I need this, the way to think about this data repeater is it binds a form to a data object, right? So if I come back into my data repeater 1 here, and I click into the empty space, I can scroll down a bit and you'll see here input type. This is the type, I'm going to find the type I just created, which will be something wrapper. What did I call that? Let me just search for wrapper. Data repeater wrapper. Now that I have that, what I'm going to do is put a label here, and I'll get my text from data name, but here I'm going to pick from data. And if I open up form data, I can select my property, right? So the workflow engine is going to bind this object to this control here. And then I'm going to put a checkbox, and you're going to see I'm going to do the same thing. Pick from data name, form data to delete. Okay. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to create a flow to host all my pieces here. And I'm going to find my form. And I don't have any data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fetch accounts, and then I'm going to use a list mapping step to map them to my type, just to quickly get myself into a testable state here. All right, and let me select my form, which is form 1. All right, so fetch entities, I'm going to fetch accounts just to get a couple objects back out. Then I'll come to my list mapping step and I will pass my entity results list from my accounts in here. Click off and back onto this step. Now this step has a thing called a item mapping editor. Oh, I may find my output type. So I'll search for wrapper, which will be data repeater wrapper. Probably should have used an entity for this. I guess it would have been made my example easier, but show item mapping editor. This isn't really about your example. I'm just mapping my account into my my thing. So I'm going to take the email address as the entity name, and I'm going to just set this to false for all of them. Now that I have that, I need to look at my form. I didn't set a data name for my data repeater. So data name here is data repeater data. Okay, selection type, I'll just leave everything else as is. And now let's just go ahead and run this once I map my data in. So selected data repeater data will come from the output of my list mapping step, and then selected line number I will ignore. So I should be able to run this now. And then get my form to render. So now you can see I've got a data grid with checkboxes, and each of them is this list mapping step is just converting my account into that data object, right? So just a data conversion. And now what I'm doing is this. So I could then for each, I'm going to for each that list that comes out, and then I'm going to check the value. So I'll search for, given the going back to the question Jeff was asking, I'm going to find my true false rule, which is a regular rule. And I'll say if the value is false, just go to the next item. But if it's true, I'm just going to show a pop-up just to make my point here. Go here and then there, go to the end. So for each is I'm going to take my output, which comes out as data repeater data. So I'll pass data repeater data from my form into my for each, which is data repeater data. And then true false. Now this transforms data repeater data into an item. So true false rule, I'll select item to delete, and I'm going to check it. And then my pop-up, I'm just going to pass in item.entity name with some garbage text for my message here. All right, I got that in place. And again, I know this is fast, so apologize. I'm going to run this, select admin and external system, and then submit. And I should get two pop-ups with external system and admin. So in your example, what I'm imagining here is you have you fetch all of your external entity data, or you use your fetch all step or whatever the appropriate step is, pass it into a form with a data row, with a data repeater based view for your rows, and then loop that list that comes out and check some property. And then if it's to be removed, you go ahead and this is where our removal logic would be. So there'd be a call to the external database or a call to some other location to say, remove this file. And then you'd scrub that whole list and then you'd end. Otherwise, it's kind of a pain in the butt to try to figure out what items are no longer in your list than it is to just scrub through the list looking for a particular value to be set to true.
Gotcha. Okay, that would work probably.
And you might need like a wrapper, like a flow structure here to do this because you probably don't want a property on your external entity called to delete or can be deleted or send for removal or whatever that might be. So you might have a type whose only job is to just you fetch them, transform it, and hold that, and then you do like another item, like another data transformation in the delete here. And that gives you that ability to have that extra property. So something like this is probably where my mind is moving to for your question.
Okay, give that a go. That should work.
Any other questions about this scenario?
About that scenario? No. Nope.
Good. Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you for the question. Carlos, is after additions, how the data that was added with the step add file references folder is discovered and recovered later. You can use our standard fetch entities step here. Let me just create a new flow to keep it simple. Once you've add file references to a folder, you get a thing called a file reference entity, and that is able to be pulled, that you're able to find that data from our standard fetch entity step. So fetch entity step is our default query builder step. And so what I can do is I'm going to search for file, and you'll see I have a file reference entity as an option here. Now, if I select this, you notice this thing has a parent folder ID. So what I need to do is get the folder ID of my folder, right? And then let me see, do I have any file references I could test with? Let's see, let me quickly build a flow that'll create a process folder for us. So I'm going to create a flow, add new process folder. And really quickly, I'm going to find a setup process folder step. And I'm going to find that same step we're talking about, which is, oh, I guess I need a form too, don't I? All right, so show form, process folder step, flow management, data, add file references to folder. There'll be form here. And on this form, I'm going to quickly put together a file upload control. So here's a button, and then here's a file upload control. I'll shrink this down. I'll select this. I'll name this thing new file, and I will change its output type from file data to file reference. And I will go ahead and save this. All right, and then I'm going to set up my process folder. I'll just dump these things into the current folder I'm in, file delete question, and I'm just going to put constant data for my folder description and folder name. And then I'm going to take that file reference and from my form, and I'm going to map it into my, I'll need to do, here I go. I need to do build array. This expects a list, but I put a single file upload. So I need to do my build array list or single to list conversion. So select item new file. And folder ID, I'm going to select from my flow, and out of the setup process folder step is the process folder ID. Okay, I have this in place. I'm going to run this flow now, add new process folder. I can run this. I can upload a file. And Carlos, if you have any questions, please feel free to interject and ask while I'm burning through this. I know it's fast. Add my file, submit. Now I have a new process folder here called add new proc folder. It's got a W, it's got a transaction number on it. And if I look inside of this thing, I'll have my file that I added in my activity view. Or if I can use my process data view, and I can see I have both a comment and this file reference entity. So I'm going to do it. Let's assume I built a flow. That flow is figuring out how to find the right folder for me. I'm just going to cheat, and I'm going to copy the folder ID out of the URL, because I just know that that's how. Again, it's just a little bit of a cheat. I'm going to come back to my flow, and I am going to I'm going to pass this in. So we created an input here called new or folder to check, folder ID to check. I'll pass that into my parent folder ID. And then I will look at results here and no results. Make sure these are separated. All right, so let me debug this. I'll put my folder ID in, save it as a unit test because I like to be able to test quickly, and run this. And I can see results come out. And if I look at my output data, it'll be my profile 17 file. And inside of the actual file reference subproperty will be the data of the file itself. So maybe I want to show it on a file download control, or send it to some other location, or add a new file, or clone the file, or whatever the process, whatever the requirement might be. But the important piece here is that I use add file references to folder, and I'm using a fetch entity step whose type name is file reference entity, specify the parent folder ID to fetch all of the file references from a given folder into another workflow. Any questions about that?
Yes, maybe when you run the type name, you can write it. You can run it dynamically, or you have to set it like a constant.
The folder ID?
The type name.
The type name is you just set that at design time. Yes. So file reference entity, you set at design time, but the IDs or the criteria that you're matching on to fetch it can be at runtime. You can set those dynamically. But you do have to specify the type name at design time.
Understand. Very clear. Thank you.
Okay, absolutely. All right, and let's see. Alex has a question.
Yeah, hopefully an easy one. I want to add a comment to a process folder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in flight. I want to do it kind of after the fact.
Okay.
So like the state thing has a set entity state where I just supply the process folder ID. I'm looking for something kind of similar for comments. Is that?
Yeah, there's the way I like to do it, which is kind of a pain because I like to be more prescriptive, and then there's probably the way that most people do. So the way to Alex's question, under flow management, data, maybe is it data, is an add comment step, and this step takes in a comment and comment name, but it doesn't let you specify the folder. And so this sort of it's kind of a magic step. It identifies its persistent folder automatically. What the way you can do this is an attach to folder step. Now, save flow data is set on this automatically. I don't like that. You can use attach to folder, pass the folder ID in, at which point the magic comes back in.
Okay.
You can tell my disdain for this step, I think, by talking about it as magic. Attach to folder, if it doesn't have it, it like builds this persistent context, which is like a process folder or a case, back into this flow to allow you to do an add comment step. Now, this is probably the more traditional way to do it, at least for newer users of the tool. So, pass your folder ID in, and then you can just do normal name and comment operations.
Right.
To add it. I actually prefer, and I've been asking for this. I don't know that they've added it yet. Yeah, add comment. That's one I just did. Add comment to folder. So you might hate this, but I'm going to go under integration, internal services, comment, and find add comment. And here I can actually use, I can specify the folder ID in the entity ID property.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was looking for.
And I can do build data and pass in comment name and comment description, which map to name and comment here. Probably also entity name as well is needed. And this step, while it's got a lot more properties, allows me to be much more, I think this reads easier and is less complicated and less quote unquote magical than these two steps used in unison.
Okay,
I don't know
this one, where is the path to this?
Yeah, integration.
Yeah.
Internal services.
Okay.
Comment. Okay. Add comment. Corey, are you still Corey? Which of these approaches do you prefer when you build your stuff, sir?
I use a third option, which is using the generic save entities step.
Oh, you add comments with save entities? Okay, yes. Sure, that would work. Yep. Look at that. This is pure decisions right here. It's something as simple as a comment. And anyone else do it differently? Matt, you do it differently? Tyler, Watson, anybody?
So
I usually use
save entities. How does this work?
You can think about it the same way. Here, the type name, you'll just specify comment, and then you'll do build data and access the properties in the same way as add comment.
Oh, wow. Lots of answers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Why do it one way when you can do it an infinite number of ways, right?
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's true. They're the lines we're doing some work to try to make the lines a bit easier. There's that weird jump, and they do that jump thing now, where if you cross the line, can I get it to cross? No, I don't know how to get it to actually make the cross. There's like a jump line. You can actually go back to older line styles, Jeff. If I wouldn't advise it, but shape defaults. They're jump lines, avoid nodes, and default. You could go back to direct, which is much closer to how we used to do things in our in our Silverlight days. So
Veronica is spinning right now.
So there's some controls available in the step toolbox, or in the under shape defaults to control these things. What's cornered? I guess cornered is just not default, but default is default. So yeah. Oh, there it is. There's that thing. That guy, which shows you a line crossing over another line. Okay, great. Anybody else have any last questions as we're getting close to the time here? Feel free to just use the raise hand action. Sabrina, did I miss a question? Did I answer all the question, the one question that was submitted?
Yes, you did. So
okay, thank you. Awesome. This is another great day of Lunch and Learn. Appreciate everyone coming. Hopefully these are really helpful. Again, we're going to do these every Monday through Thursday. I believe tomorrow we've got Eric Madrano up, and then who's Thursday, Sabrina? It's
I believe it's
Sonali.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, wonderful. Yeah, go ahead, Jerry. Yeah, sorry, I'm Sabrina, if you can let Jerry speak. Sorry.
Did you say that you will post these videos?
Yes. Have we started posting them on YouTube yet, Sabrina?
The YouTube page is up, no videos yet, but it's in the process. So some should be started to get uploaded this week.
Okay. Yeah, but we can send you the recording as soon as we have it available. And we're just finishing up getting we're gonna have a Lunch and Learn playlist that we post everything to on a decision support YouTube channel that we're hopefully having done in the next few days.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, if that's everything, appreciate you guys joining today. Make sure you let everyone else know at your particular orgs that we're doing this. Hopefully it's helpful, and talk to you soon. Have a great afternoon.